Hi, I'm Joni Patry, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Well, today I'd like to talk about divisional charts, and I'd like to start a series where I discuss these deeper. But the first divisional chart that I'd like to discuss today is one of the most interesting ones. To me, this explains the whole purpose of why we're here. And it is the D12 called the Dwadashamsha chart. The Dwadashamsha chart essentially tells us about our past lives, our parents, everything to do with who we are today because of who we were before. This will tell us about past lifetimes, experiences, and many of the gifts and the talents that we bring in this lifetime due to our past lifetimes. So it's really about reincarnation. And the other thing that this chart is going to tell you, besides specifics of early childhood and how our parents had their effects on us, but it specifically tells us about parents, about our dharma, our purpose, but it also tells you about all of your fears, your deepest, darkest fears that somehow in some way control our lives today, because this is essentially what moves us. The things that we fear, but our greatest rewards and gifts. So this is everything the 12th house is about. So it is our hidden fears that can sometimes control us. And sometimes we do and act a certain way and we don't understand why. It could be because of something that occurred in your past life. That still has a hold and an effect on us. And it really has created who we are. The past is who we have become. But through knowing what we want to change from the past, our karma of the soul, this can better equip us to change our lives for the better, because we see where the things are from our past occurred so that we can better break the chains of karma to better improve ourselves for the future lives, or for moksha, to find liberation of the soul from this life. So another thing about the Dwadashamsha chart, it really does heighten and explicitly tell you details about the 12th house, but also notice where the sun is in the Dwadashamsha chart, because the sun is the most important planet that you should be looking for in this chart, because the sun is our soul. It's our spirit, but it is our soul essence. And where the sun is in the Dwadashamsha chart will give you reference to where your soul is in this lifetime. Now let me explain a little bit on how to calculate the Dwadashamsha so you have a better understanding of these divisional charts. So the divisional charts are when you take a sign and you make the divisions in the sign, and you do this to all 12 signs. So the way the Dwadashamsha chart is divided is there are 12 segments. 30 degrees are divided into 12 segments. And each one of these segments are 2 degrees, 30 minutes. So if you take 12 segments, 2 degrees, 30 minutes, you will come up with 30 degrees of the sign. So the very first Dwad of this Dwadashamsha chart, the very first one of a sign will always start with that sign that the house is. So if the house is Taurus, the first Dwad will be Taurus, the first 2 degrees, 30 minutes. Then the next 2 degrees, 30 minutes will be in the next sign that follows in the natural zodiac. So if it's Taurus, the next sign that follows Taurus is Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, Sag, till you come to the 12th division. And then when you start with the next house and the next sign, you will see that it will pick up right where it left off. So the next sign in the order of the zodiac goes all the way around. All 12 of the houses, all 12 of the signs, all divided into 12. Each segment 2 degrees, 30 minutes. So now that you know how this is configured, you will go to your astrology program to figure out your Dwadashamsha chart. And the chart that I would like to look at is a very profound individual that I think really gives the meaning to spirituality. And I feel like the Dwadashamsha chart will really depict our powers from previous lifetimes. So if someone is very powerful in this lifetime, rest assured it's because they developed this power in a previous lifetime. And in this lifetime, it's up to them whether they use their powers for good or abuse their powers. I have seen this repeatedly in the Dwadashamsha chart of very powerful people. It's all there from the past. So looking at who I want to study with this chart is somebody that I feel like really has followed his own teachings, and it's Ram Dass. So Ram Dass was actually Richard Alpert before he changed his name, and he began at Harvard University in the psychology department, had a PhD in psychology, and he worked with Timothy Leary. And it is well documented and known that they were doing experiments at Harvard with LSD. And, you know, just to give you a little background of Richard Alpert, when he was growing up, he was Jewish, and he said something to the effect during the time of his bar mitzvah, he didn't believe in God, he didn't believe in religion, and he didn't really want any part of his bar mitzvah. So he really considered himself an atheist. He couldn't prove God, he didn't believe in God. So it wasn't until he experimented with LSD that he had an experience that opened his mind to spirituality. It enlightened him. And now that they were at Harvard and his whole mind and consciousness became aware and opened, at the same time, he and Timothy Leary got fired from Harvard University. So Timothy Leary went on and tune in, tune out, get high, while Richard Alpert went to India. He went on the journey of his life to India, and he became more and more and even truly enlightened, and changed his name to Ram Dass. He wrote one of my favorite books of the 70s. It was called Be Here Now. It was an eye-opener. And let me say this, he was on the forefront of the whole guru spirituality beginnings of all the transcendental changes that went on spiritually. This was him. So I want to look at his chart and see what his Dwadashamsha chart tells us about his past lives, and realize he never married. And actually, a little tidbit of information here. He was unaware that he had gotten a girl pregnant in college, and didn't find out till he was 24 years old that he had a son, or much, much later. So, or maybe it was, I think it was his son that was 24, but one way or another, he had no idea that he had had a son till he was a lot older. So looking at Ram Dass's chart, let's put up his birth chart and compare it to the Dwadashamsha chart. So I have Ram Dass born April 6, 1931, and the time I'm using is 10:40 a.m. in Boston, Massachusetts. And with this, Ram Dass's his ascendant is in Gemini, 25 degrees of Gemini, and he does have Pluto right on his sun. You know, this is transformational. Pluto is all about change and transformation. It is about control and manipulation all at the same time. But in this case, it really represented transformation. And he has Jupiter right on the ascendant. That is quite a blessing and will direct him to his spirituality. But being in Gemini, you know, Gemini is all about understanding things, learning, education. So his moon, which is debilitated in Scorpio, is in the 6th house. So that's a bit of a struggle. But when you look to his Mars, which is in his 2nd house, it is debilitated as well. Understanding that the childhood was difficult because the 2nd house rules early childhood. Mars being debilitated there is not so easy, but let me point out the parivartana between his moon and his Mars. Mars is in the moon sign and the moon is in Mars sign by being in Scorpio and Mars being in Cancer. This exchange of signs really empowers these houses. So it's about health and healing that he is here to speak about because of the connection between the 2nd house of the voice and the 6th house of health and healing. He is the voice of healing. So Saturn being in his 7th house, he never married. And it is reported that he has claimed he's bisexual. So he never married, but really he has devoted himself to his spirituality. And where I see the most interesting aspect of his life and his chart is when you go to the 10th house. Because in his 10th house, he has the Sun and Uranus exactly conjunct. And Rahu is there within a degree. So Sun, Rahu, Uranus, that is off the charts crazy. I mean, and they're in Pisces, ruled by Jupiter. Jupiter is about spirituality and truth. But more than anything, this definitely explains his experimentation at his job, his career as a professor at Harvard, experimenting with LSD. How unconventional and rebellious can you get than this? And that's exactly what Uranus is about. And Rahu brings things to the highest extreme of all. Now, having Venus in the 9th house in Aquarius also will bring him a desire for spirituality, for truth. And his Venus is exactly opposed Neptune, in Neptune being in Leo in the 3rd house. So really this portrays his ability to teach spirituality. And probably with Venus there, it's probably many women followers, I must say. So Mercury is in the 11th. This would be about his friends, his groups, the organizations that he's a part of. And he is part of many diverse organizations, with Mercury being in the 11th house. But let's now look at, we know that he has been awakened because of the Uranus Sun in the 10th house. He is the awakener. The Sun rules the 3rd house, which deals with teaching, writing, learning, education, and of course entertaining, which he does a lot of that when he teaches. He's he's got a fabulous sense of humor. And that's that really strong Uranus Sun. And being with Rahu in the 10th. But looking at this, I want you to know the 10th house, he is an entertainer, ruler of the 3rd and the 10th. But he entertains people with spiritual subjects, and that's part and do with his writing. But let's look at his Dwadashamsha chart to see what powers he brought with him in this lifetime. And it really doesn't take an in-depth study of this chart to truly understand who he was and what he brought to this lifetime. So looking at his Dwadashamsha chart, we see he has an Aries ascendant. And Pluto, once again, is on the ascendant, and Pluto is power. So he brought into this lifetime, from his previous lifetime, a sense of power, a sense of being in control with Pluto on the ascendant. Now Mars rules Aries, and it goes to the 7th house. The 7th house is the house of marriage. And with this, he had problems with marriage in a past lifetime with Mars being here. Therefore, he didn't marry in this lifetime. So he brought with him this problematic area, because Mars in the 7th is not going to produce marriage or a good marriage. It causes problems in marriage, let me put it that way. Now, Mars does rule the 8th house in this chart and goes to the 7th house, which further indicates marital problems in his past life. And Saturn, Rahu, and Uranus in the 8th house. He brought with him these deep convictions about getting to the core, the bottom, to experiment, to understand the deeper aspects of life. That's who he was in a previous lifetime. He was constantly researching the depths of the soul. Because when we look at the sun in this chart, it is in the 9th house of spirituality and truth. But I think the most significant aspect of the sun being in his 9th house is the fact that it is exactly to the same degree conjunct Neptune, which is spirituality. So you see, he was a spiritual teacher before, of the utmost extreme spirituality, because Neptune is the depths of spirit, and the sun is the soul. To have the sun conjunct Neptune in the 9th house, he was a spiritual teacher, very conscious and very aware, because he was always searching to understand things. Saturn in the 8th, with Rahu and Uranus, to understand the deeper aspects of life and why we're here. Jupiter is in the 10th house. Now Jupiter is in Capricorn, so it's weak, but it's in the 10th house. This could be a spiritual teacher, but a different kind of spiritual teacher, because it is in Capricorn. It's more about practicality in the world. And looking at his Venus is in Cancer in the 4th house. So his mother, he had, I think, a good relationship with his mother in the past lifetime, bringing that forward. And remember, by looking at this chart, you can see the parents. So going to the 4th and going to the moon in this chart will reveal issues about the mother, which the moon, ruler of the 4th in this chart, goes to the 1st house, and Venus is in the 4th. In his past life, he was deeply connected to his mother. And I would imagine their relationship went on to a good relationship in this current life. And the father was significant and important in his teachings in his previous lifetimes, because the sun is the father. It's in the 9th house with Neptune. So his parents were really imperative to who he is in this lifetime and what he became. They taught him well, they led him well, they inspired him in some wonderful way. But just to take it a step further, the way that I look at these divisional charts in terms of prediction is if you take the Mahadasha ruling planets of whatever time you're trying to make a prediction for, you take those Mahadasha ruling planets, the Mahadasha and the Bhukti, and you see what houses they are in the divisional charts. So relative to Ram Das, currently right now, he is in Rahu Mars. And in his birth chart, Mars is in the 2nd house, and Rahu is in his 10th house. So he's come to a real high elevation in his life and his realization in Rahu's Mahadasha, this 18-year period. So he will end Rahu Mars May 14th of 2019. And I have to say, Mars is treacherous, being in his 2nd house, dealing with a Marika. It's a Marika planet by being placed in the 2nd house. Marika means death inflicting. So he is at this point in time, he's in his 80s, and he's not all that healthy. He had a stroke that almost took his life years ago, but he recovered, and he speaks of the truths that illness, that stroke brought him. He became even more aware through the process of that stroke. Now he will enter into Jupiter's Mahadasha May 14th of 2019, the 16-year cycle of Jupiter. Now going to the Dwadashamsha chart, his Mars is in the 7th. Once again, that's a Marika. And Rahu is in the 8th. And if you'll look here, Mars rules the 8th. He's only got a few months left of this dasha. Will he make it? It's not an easy dasha for him to overcome. But then he will go into Jupiter. And Jupiter is in the 1st house of his birth chart, and it's in his 10th house of his Dwadashamsha chart, which tells me he will be remembered greatly, and he will be honored and recognized for the vast duration of the time that he's here, and well beyond his years. For the next 16 years, he will be regarded in a high position. So now you get a better understanding of how to look at these charts. Looking at the Mahadasha Bhukti in these charts is the most relevant thing, but more than anything, it really exemplifies a certain house and certain planets in a specific way. You cannot read marriage or career in the Dwadashamsha chart. You can only read variables that reflect the deeper essence of the 12th house of the birth chart. So with that, I'd like to close. If you would like to learn more about Vedic astrology, you can always check out my university, which website is universityofvedicastrology.com. And if you would like to learn more about me or would like a reading, you can always go to my website, which is galacticcenter.org. Thank you.